Welcome to the Wheel of Time Diaries. I'm your host, King Crusoe, but you can call me KC, and this week is our third week covering A Crown of Swords, the seventh book of the series. Chapters, if I'm not mistaken, 18 through 27 is what we covered. I'm now 2/3 of the way through the book, following about 6 hours, just over 6 hours of reading this weekend, making a grand total of 22 or a little over 22 hours of reading in A Crown of Swords total. It's been, I would say this week was probably, this third week is the roughest week, I think, of the 3 weeks in terms of how much I enjoyed the content. There were a couple chapters that were really shaky, really rocky for one reason or another, and we'll get to that in due time. But even still, I've enjoyed the book. Similar sentiment as how I ended off the last diary, and I'm going to try my absolute hardest to make sure this diary is not as long as the last one, because good grief, that was way too long. I should be able to do fine on that front, but we'll see what happens. I don't see how anybody could possibly lump A Crown of Swords in with a supposed slog in the series. Of course, I have not read books 8 through 10, which are like the biggest, the biggest offenders on the part of being sloggy in the series, according to a significant chunk of readers. And some people consider A Crown of Swords to be part of that. Some people don't. I think, at least at this point, 2/3 of the way through the book, I'm definitely somebody who's going to say this isn't a slog. It's no different paced or anything than any of the rest of the book. And this week was the first week where I really had like some major issues with a couple of the things that happened, but that's basically all I need to talk about for the introduction. Most everything that I want to say is stuff related to actual events, so we'll just jump into the spoiler-filled portion of this. Like I said, we're covering chapters 18 through 27, so let's jump right into it. I would say the reading this week had the most variation in POVs. There was a bit more of a habit of going one chapter with one character, one chapter with another character, and a couple chapters being kind of split in half with two different major POVs having stuff going on in them. So that was a rather interesting structural decision that Robert Jordan made through the reading of the week. But chapter 18 starts us off following all of the mostly Matt stuff that we ended last week off of. We come into a chapter of Rand's POV for chapter 18, and I believe it's the only Rand POV in this portion. I think we've only had a couple of his chapters through the entire book, interestingly enough. But chapter 18 is one of these POVs where we have Rand meeting with Marana, who is the Aes Sedai, who is meant to be kind of the embassy from the Saladar portion of the Aes Sedai, which this chapter is actually really helpful for me because, you know, last week I think I mentioned Marana, and I had basically forgotten her and her role in the series at this point in that video, but this chapter definitely reminded me like kind of the role that she played in Lord of Chaos. And in fact, I'm pretty sure she was one of the ones to swear fealty to Rand, right? She was one of the Aes Sedai to do that at the end of Lord of Chaos, you know, in the wake of Dumai's Wells, because he did that with a few of the Aes Sedai that were there. So I presume that she must have been one of those. I forget the exact details, but I did recall a little bit more of Marana's role in the series. Either way, Rand is trying to assure Marana, and therefore the other Aes Sedai that are kind of in this area with him, that are not necessarily in support of him, but because some of them had to swear fealty to him, they technically do support him just by swear of oath. Rand is ensuring Marana through this conversation that the Ashaman are under his control, that they aren't allowed to channel without his control, because obviously it's a pretty big concern for Aes Sedai and women channelers that there's male channelers in the world at all, especially beyond the Dragon Reborn, and the fact that Rand has kind of his own Black Tower is a concern for these people. So of course Rand has to assure Marana that the Ashaman don't just get to do whatever they want to do whenever he's around. So that was something that started the chapter. Also in this discussion is, also in this conversation is a little bit of discussion about the Wise Ones and the Aiel in relation to the Shido, the sort of relationship that's kind of going on in the world here, how it might be most efficient to kind of go after the Shido, what kind of dangers they currently pose at this current point in time, those kinds of details. Not anything is really determined. in this conversation, but that's part of what the chapter does. Barrelane enters into the throne room partway through this sort of conversation. She enters with Honora, the Aes Sedai, who was kind of her counselor, who was quote-unquote advising Colivera, who was, the person who basically usurped the throne while Rand was away from Carrion for a little while, whom Rand subjected or sentenced to being contained on, like, her smallest farm estate. Barrelane and Honora enter here, having been told that Barrelane was going to be returning to Mayene under Rand's basically Rand's orders. He says that she is going to be returning to her home country, despite having been a sort of proxy leader in Carrion for a good long while, and Rand justifies this because of some of the problems that have been kind of going on, and also, I believe, because Barrelane might be in some sort of active danger in this position. I forget the exact details of that. In fact, I might completely be making that up, so forgive me if I'm wrong on that. But either way, Barrelane is distraught by what she more or less perceives to be a betrayal by Rand, sending her back to Mayene here instead of continuing to rely on her. Also, partway through this portion of the conversation, we see a familiar face for those of us who have read New Spring. So if you haven't read New Spring, it's kind of a spoiler for one of the characters that appears in there, Cadsuane, who's an Aes Sedai who's kind of just existed on the edges of the world that many other Aes Sedai have either forgotten exist, or forgotten rather is still alive. Some have thought that she's been dead by now. Others had no idea that she was even around or anything like that. She's an Aes Sedai that appears in New Spring, so I'm sorry if you haven't read that book yet, but I read it after book 5, and so I kind of knew that this character would exist. In fact, I'm pretty sure I predicted in the couple diaries that I did for that book that Cadsuane was the character that people said, you'll technically be spoiled for a character that you don't meet until book 7. I was right about that, so that's fun. But either way, this is a character that exists now in the main series, which is really interesting. Looking forward to seeing how the dynamics of everything change, particularly amongst the various Aes Sedai, kind of move forward with Cadsuane, because as we'll see in next chapter, Cadsuane's loyalties are very vague. We don't really know, at least I can't really determine off the top of my head, like where precisely she falls, but we will see about that. Either way, Cadsuane enters into the conversation here, putting Marana and Honora both out of sorts because of them both believing that she had either died at some point in time, or that there's no reason why she should still be around, or however it is that you want to think of it. Cadsuane, however, is very calm and collected, and it easily confronts Rand, despite Rand being pretty fiery in the few chapters that we have of his POV in this book so far. Cadsuane seems to gauge what is going on with Rand to a pretty significant degree that doesn't really seem possible. So there's some interesting, like, quasi-mystery afoot with how she's able to know what she knows to the degree that she knows it. And Rand also becomes frustrated as kind of a result, especially as Cadsuane scarcely says what she's doing here. Rand tries to ask her what it is she wants, what it is she's doing in Carrion, what it is she's in the throne room asking for, and she doesn't really send much. In the middle, or rather at the end of the discussion, he gets very frustrated and sends everyone away completely, everybody including like his sort of bodyguards, so that he can just be in the room alone. Rand is kind of battling with himself in his head while he paces around in the room until one of the Aiel, who was, sent away earlier, returns with a character called Idrian, who seems to be the head of Rand's school in Carrion. I don't recall if this character has been in the series before. I'm assuming she probably must have been at least mentioned, if not on the page at one point, but not significant enough for me to personally remember off the top of my head. But this character is the head of Rand's school in Carrion, and this Idrian seems to be in despair over something that is not yet revealed. We'll have that revealed in short order in a handful of chapters from now, but we're left at the end of chapter 18 with this sort of like question of like, okay, what in the world is Idrian so upset about? And what is it that Rand goes into flying rage about after the fact as well, because we'll get to see that in a couple chapters too. Or rather, it's in this next chapter, it's just at the end of this next chapter. But moving into chapter 19, Diamonds and Stars, we actually come into, is it Mirana's POV. It might be Mirana's POV, but it might be Cad's. I don't remember whose POV exactly it is, but either way, we're following Cadsuane and Mirana and Anora as they are, the two of them are being led by Cadsuane to a room to basically question them about what the deal is with Rand to get more information about all of that. And Mirana tries to question Cadsuane back unsuccessfully, kind of the same thing as what was going on with Rand there. Rand wasn't really getting an answer to like what it was that Cadsuane's doing here. Mirana, sure as heck, didn't get an answer to this. Pretty sure Mirana's the POV. I'm pretty sure. Anyway, we still have no idea what it is precisely that Cadsuane's doing here and what motivated her to return to the land of the living, so to speak. In this moment, and particularly get herself concerned with Rand because it's kind of a big deal. Other Aes Sedai are kind of joined into this conversation, this sort of questioning as Cadsuane tries to move through them all to get as much information as she possibly can about Rand, about the Dragon Reborn, about what's been going on in the world while she's been kind of off and away. And this continues on for most of the rest of the sween. Cadsuane learns at one point about Rand's kidnapping on account of the other Aes Sedai who kind of had to go save him, even though he technically saved himself before they could save him. But the event at Dumai's Wells that happened, Cadsuane intends to study the Dragon Reborn. That's basically all that we're able to get from this moment. And it appears she's not particularly happy with Elaida in her position at the White Tower, like having usurped Swan Sanche as Amyrlin's seat of the White Tower. This is a very interesting note for me because it really makes us, like I said, kind of, it's not entirely clear what alliances Cadsuane actually has with anybody in here. She doesn't seem to be particularly fond of Elaida as a result of what we kind of get in this chapter. She's, like I said, not very happy with at least the manner in which Elaida became Amyrlin. She's not particularly happy with Elaida in general, but she also doesn't seem to be like in active support of, say, a rebel group either, assuming she even knows that the rebels are kind of their own organized part of the Aes Sedai establishment, I guess you could call it. So there's not a whole lot of information that we're really getting that's very clear regarding this. So I'm interested to see where Cadsuane's influence on the series moves forward, because we don't really know what it is she's doing. We don't know who it is she supports, or if she's just kind of flying her own plane, I guess, sailing her own ship, going her own direction. But what exactly her motivations are and why, all that kind of stuff is a little bit less clear. We're not 100% sure on all of that, but it is still interesting nonetheless. The second half of Chapter 19 moves to Min's POV, and I really like Min as a character. I always like when we get her POVs in these books, even when they're pretty short, pretty few and far between as well. But in this POV, we have Min entering Rand's throne room, following obviously the events that happened at the end of last chapter. She's witnessing the destruction of the throne room that he caused after learning from Idrian that Herod Fell had been killed by something of the Shadow, or at least Rand is fairly convinced that he had to have been killed by something of the Shadow, something that the Dark One, well, if we recall, let's backtrack just a tiny bit. Lord of Chaos, Herod Fell was kind of like a librarian of sorts. He was kind of somebody who studied written material as like his entire life. He had a habit of like forgetting that he was in the middle of conversations with people because he was studying stuff. This was the temperament that he had. But in Lord of Chaos, he was helping Rand, giving him information about things that Rand wanted to know more about. There's at one point before Rand set off for somewhere in the Lord of Chaos, it might have been when he was like going on a few days to Camelin or something like that. I don't remember precisely, but Herod basically told Rand, hey, like, I have something to tell you. This is very important. Rand's like, okay, I don't have time right now, but I'll get back to it later. And well, now it's later, but Idrian had discovered that Herod Fell had been torn to pieces, and as a result, Rand assumes that it had to have been something Shadow Sworn, I guess you could say, had to have been the one to kill Herod. But now Rand's left wondering, okay, what was it that he had to tell me? I have no idea. And it must have been very important if the Dark One really sent somebody after him to kill him, like, immediately, you know, before something could be told to me. So that's an interesting mystery that we probably won't get a direct answer to for a long while, if ever. Min also informs Rand in this moment that Culliveri was hanged in her apartments. It's not really specified by who, if she did it to herself or if somebody else murdered her or something. Like I said, it's not entirely clear. I don't know. I have no idea one way or the other. I'm not going to make an assumption one way or the other if that is something that is made clear in the chapter and I just completely missed it. Again, I apologize for missing little details, but even so, Culliveri, who Rand had sentenced to basically live the rest of her life confined to her smallest estate, and all the rest of them were being torn from her, she's now dead, and Min was the one to see that, hence why she went directly to Rand, because she's kind of distraught because of this, so there's that. And also, it seems like it's suggested that Rand and Min make love at the end of this chapter, it seems to be suggested, which is a really weird time to do that, but who am I to judge? That would make two really weird times that Rand has made love with somebody in this series. So we'll kind of move on from here. Chapter 20 moves us to a little bit more of an in-between chapter with a couple, quite frankly, I'm just going to be honest. Chapter 20 was one of two chapters that was incredibly like, what is even going on here? Where there's like stuff happening that I'm not entirely sure I followed very well. So we'll see how well I'm able to recount some of the events that happens in here. Chapter 20 is Savannah's POV to start. There's kind of two little sections of this chapter, but Savannah, who is one of the wise ones of the Shaido Aiel, is the POV again, having been a POV in the prologue of this book. She and the other Shaido wise ones communicate with some guy named Kadar through some sort of mechanism that they have to be able to communicate with people long distances. They ask for a meeting with Kadar, and more specifically, one of them asks to be able to meet with him like 10 days from this current scene in the spot where they first met for like an easy meeting place. But in the course of the meeting, Kadar just comes straight up. He's like, no, I can be there like immediately, and he shows up immediately basically through a traveling gateway. So he's obviously, or at least it seems like he's obviously somebody who can wield saidin to some degree at this point. He comes with a woman whom he calls Mycia or something like that. Might be pronounced a little bit differently, but somebody who obviously doesn't like being called that for one reason or another. These two were supposed to give the Wise Ones a sort of way to control Rand, but because they don't have Rand with them, I guess they were supposed to be able to, I guess, capture Rand and be able to take him for themselves in the course of the prologue. That's what they were attempting to do before they were chased off and largely defeated from that portion of the battle. Because they don't have Rand, Kadar is not entirely willing to give them the ability to control Rand like he said he would give. So the Wise Ones ask instead for a means of traveling, like what Kadar was able to do just then. The rest of the chapter switches to a different POV who is unnamed, if I'm not mistaken. The second POV seems to be some unknown watcher who is just kind of watching as whom he calls Samael and Graendal, a couple of the Forsaken, of course, who are revealed to have been the real identities of Kadar and Mycia. So a lot of questions that I had through the first portion of the chapter, I'm like, what is even happening? The second scene here clears up by simply saying that Samael is Kadar and Graendal is Mycia. After the meeting with the Wise Ones, this unknown watcher is watching them, of course, kind of from the shadows while they converse with each other. Essentially, these two Forsaken are plotting something with the Aiel, with the Shaido Aiel. Graendal is resistant to teach them much of anything because, of course, she's the one who would have to teach these wise ones, these wise women, how to use the power because saidar and saidin are very different magic. Graendal doesn't really want to teach them anything because that could prove dangerous for the Forsaken themselves. And Samael is very antagonistic towards Graendal for reasons of their alliance not being the most smooth thing in the world, which of course makes sense. But whatever it is that they're plotting, not entirely sure what that is yet either. There are kind of some suggestions and hits, but nothing super explicit at this point. But then we move into the next handful of chapters, chapters 21 through 24, it seems like, which take us back once again, more or less immediately, to Matt's POV for a short portion of chapter 21, or rather, for a short portion of chapter 21. And then the rest of this stuff is back into Elaine's and Nynaeve's POV, switching back up with a couple short portions elsewise. So let's just go ahead and cover this section here. Chapter 21 starts off with Matt once again returning to his inn because I guess he was out again for whatever reason that's not quite specified. He gets informed when he enters his inn again that a gilded woman is in his room, and he goes up to his room to find that Birgit is there. So Birgit is here on task from Elaine and Nynaeve, having been told to have Matt come to them the next morning because they have some things to discuss, is basically what's going on. Some of that isn't revealed until the next portion of this chapter, but that's okay. Either way, Matt and Birgit are kind of conversing here. They speak for at least part of their conversation in old or dead languages like the Old Tongue, not least because Matt happens to recognize Birgit through some of his memories that he has from past lives, from past incarnations of himself that happen to remember Birgit as the hunter, and he recognizes her immediately for some reason upon this meeting. He's just like, wait a minute, I actually know you. Birgit sees that he recognizes her, so they kind of have to like promise, I guess, each other in some weird way. They're kind of secrets being safe with the other. Matt not revealing who Birgit is because he's one of only a few people who know at this point. And Birgit not revealing that Matt happens to speak old dead languages because I guess that's an important thing to keep secret, or rather that he doesn't really like revealing to people. He tries to keep it under wraps, but sometimes it just pops out from him and some other people. Birgit at least makes that promise. Matt never truly does, but there's this meeting between them. They did end up getting drunk, as is revealed in the next portion of the scene, where we're back in the palace in Nynaeve's POV at this point, where the kind of group of women, and I guess those two women, plus Tom and Sandar happen to be in this scene as well. These group wonder about how to handle, say, Caridin, for example, the dark friend White Cloak, which they learned about through Matt's note, which Matt had written in the audience of Queen Tylin. Is that her name? I've already forgotten her name off the top of my head, but you know, the queen within Terrasen Palace of Abu Dar. Avienda happens to... Avienda's here too, of course. How could I have forgotten about her? Avienda wonders why they don't just kill Caridin, because in Aiel culture, shadow runners, as they call dark friends, are always just kind of killed immediately after being discovered. They don't have any tolerance for that. So Avienda wonders why Wetlanders don't just do that. Elaine ends up suggesting some disguises and following Caridin so that they can like jump him or something along those lines. Elaine appears from Nynaeve's perspective to be a little bit drunk, which is confirmed because of Birgit returning to them being very drunk. Something about the bond between them as both being women, like Elaine with her warder Birgit, instead of the way that normal Aes Sedai and male warders, their bonds don't really influence the feelings of like drunkenness. When it comes to a warder getting drunk, the Aes Sedai doesn't get drunk with them, so maybe something about both of them being women affects this. But either way, Elaine is slightly tipsy or has to concentrate on not being drunk because of Birgit's having gotten drunk with Matt over in this portion of the book. Birgit says to them that Matt might come to them in the morning, but at this point they were out so long and were so drunk that it's not likely that Matt's going to be in good condition in the morning. So we obviously see them go to Matt's inn to talk to him directly in the next chapter, which we'll get to. But Birgit explains to them as well that Matt basically wants an apology from them about he wants an apology and also thanks for freeing them from the Stone of Tyr back in The Dragon Reborn, all the way back then, several books ago. He's kind of annoyed, it seems like, that they never thanked him for freeing them, even though there may or may not have been a way for them to free themselves given time or an opportunity or something like that, but Matt ended up freeing them anyway. He never got thanked for it, and he wants to be thanked for it, and also wants an apology for it. So this was an entertaining thing, and also one of the things that is kind of inducing Nynaeve to be slightly more annoying in these next couple chapters than she has been for the last several books for me, because she's just so butthurt about having to apologize, or about even the suggestion of apologizing to Matt Cawthon. She really doesn't like the idea of it, so she's just being annoying and like, I'm not going to do it, I'm not going to do it, which is stupid and silly, but that's kind of her character. I found myself being a little bit more amused by it than aggravated by it, but it's still a little bit annoying nonetheless. So obviously, Nynaeve is pretty distraught by the suggestion that the girls have to apologize to him, let alone thank him. Or maybe the other way around, that they have to thank him, let alone apologize to him for not thanking him earlier. But Aviendha convinces Elaine, at the very least, that they have severe tow with Matt for never doing that, and for the way that they've been treating him in the time since, which is kind of like shaking him off hand and not really liking him, or not interacting with him, not telling him anything about what they're doing. So Aviendha convinces Elaine that they have tow for him, and that for that matter, they also have tow to Sandar, which this portion of the conversation was done without Tom or Sandar in the room, but they have tow to Sandar because Sandar also helped free them in the stone, and he also never got thanked for it. But Aviendha convinces them that they kind of have to apologize. So that sees us moving into chapter 22 with Elaine and Nynaeve going over to a very hungover Matt in his inn's room, apologizing for the way that they've treated him over the past few books, thanking him for freeing them from the stone at last. Elaine more patiently, with more like actual gratitude, whereas Nynaeve, it has to be drug out of her, just like everything has to be drug out of Nynaeve, just on account of her attitude. Matt is essentially invited by them both as well to help them search for the Bowl of the Winds and to move into the Terrasen Palace from the inn, because a part of this sort of tow is not just apologizing, not just asking forgiveness, but it's like actually doing things to kind of repay stuff. So them asking Matt, or insisting that Matt should be part of what it is that they're doing here in Abu Dar, is part of them trying to do this, repaying tow here. After this little scene, this interaction between the three of them, the two girls are jumped in the hallway just outside of Matt's door by Mistress Anan, who's the owner of the inn. She absolutely refuses to believe them when she drags them into a room, asking like, what are they doing here? Who they are, for example. She just refuses to believe that they are Aes Sedai for any reason at all, and will not let them speak for more than 2.5 milliseconds. And this actually started to piss me off by the end of the chapter. I'm like, okay, this is really bothering me. Just let them freaking talk, woman. You're being incredibly aggravating. And she just happened to continue like this through the rest of the chapter nonetheless. She refuses to let them explain their position or explain anything more than what they've said, because of course Elaine and Nynaeve are Aes Sedai, and they insist upon that, but Mistress Anan just refuses to believe them. Like I said, just refuses to even consider that they could even partially be telling the truth. She says that Nynaeve might maybe have been to the tower for a small period of time, but Elaine is certainly too young to even be really a novice, basically, is what she insists. You guys are not Aes Sedai, stop, and refuses to let them explain further, so that's annoying. Like I said, Nynaeve and even Elaine to a separate degree in these couple chapters are starting to get a little bit more annoying in this book than they've been in previous books for me. But like I said, that's in a more amusing way versus Mistress Anan here, who really, really started to bother me in no time at all, and has actually been probably my biggest complaint with this book so far. Actually, it's been her and then another character we're about to meet over the next couple chapters. Just let them talk and maybe even try to believe them for a split second. But no, Mr. Sinan has made me forget how minorly annoyed I was with Nynaeve and Elaine over these couple chapters. Just not particularly liking the attitudes from the girls in this book so far, but whatever. Mr. Sinan is no, I would prefer she not exist for the rest of the book, because this is not good. Anyway, moving into chapter 3, you have Mistress Anan taking Elaine and Nynaeve to Rian, because as part of the last chapter, she more or less forces them to be taken to a circle of women, another group where runaways from the White Tower or other women, wilders who can channel, are taken just to be able to use the power, be trained in the power to some degree, but not be like full Aes Sedai, or people who have the power and want to be able to use it for reasons but don't want to be Aes Sedai. Whatever the technicalities of all that is, Mistress Anon more or less forces these two to be taken to Rianne, who is basically the head, or sort of kind of the head maybe, of a house full of many wielders of the power. That's where they're taken in the beginning of chapter 23. Rianne is no less willing than Mistress Anan to listen to the girls or hear them out or let them really explain anything. She gets obviously the information from Anan that these two claim to be Aes Sedai, Elaine of the Green Aja, Nynaeve of the Yellow Aja, and she also just absolutely refuses to let them speak for even half a second, and chapter 23 was terrible as a result. I did not like this chapter. It got on my nerves with having two women that just refuse to listen to Elaine and Nynaeve even a little bit. Like, not even a little bit. They do not try at all. Really aggravating. Hated this chapter. It was not fun at all. My only solace that I got at... Oh, wait, never mind. The chapter was pretty long. I was going to say my only solace was that the chapter was short. No, chapter 24 is short. And also was not the funnest thing in the world either. The first half of it is... I think it's a POV from Rianne specifically, having sent the girls away because the girls, at this point, like, actually refuse the help of these women because all they want... The reason, I suppose I should like add some details that I've kind of forgotten about over the last couple chapters here, is Nynaeve is willing to go with Anan to be taken to Rianne. Or Anan, whatever her name is, it doesn't matter. Nynaeve is willing to go along with this, whereas Elaine isn't, because Nynaeve is pretty convinced that if there is a sort of collective, and more specifically a society of sorts of women who can channel, that they might have a stash of Angreal, Seangreal, Terangreal and stuff, and what they're looking for is the Bowl of the Winds. So Nynaeve is convinced that these other women must have it, so she's willing to go along with Anan, whereas Elaine isn't. That's an important detail that I should have mentioned, even though Anan does essentially more or less force for them to follow her anyway, so it's not entirely Anan's fault. Nynaeve also insists that they have to do it anyway because they need the Bowl of the Winds, whereas Elaine's less happy about it. This was the chapter in which Elaine got a little bit more annoying for me because of the various different reactions to the women, but that's okay. In the meeting with Rianne in this last chapter, what the girls are just trying to get, what Nynaeve's trying to influence them to help, is like, please help us just find this item, the Bowl of the Winds. That's all we're looking for. That's all we need, and then we'll be on our way. But because Rianne is similar to Mistress Anan and refuses to believe that they are Aes Sedai, that they are who they say they are, despite questioning them to some degree, like, okay, here are some things that novices should know, or something like that, and determining that they probably were at the tower for one reason or another. That's basically all they get from the two girls, and that's all the use that they end up being in this portion. And yeah, the meeting just didn't go well. I didn't enjoy the chapter pretty much at all because it was just annoying being like, okay, the girls are answering questions. Let them ask their own questions. Let them tell you what they know of the Tower of the Aes Sedai anyway, to try to convince you that maybe they're Aes Sedai. Maybe listen to them for a split second. And she just doesn't. It's really, really annoying. Really annoying. And chapter 24 starts off with a POV from Rianne and conversing with a couple of the other women of this circle, this society of women, whatever it is. I don't like these characters. I don't like any of them, actually. They're all aggravating. They're all annoying. They're all stupid. I don't even know what it is that they've got going on secretly, collectively within this little society that they've got. And frankly, I don't think I want to know because I don't like any of these characters. They're just annoying. But the rest of chapter 24 is just Elaine and Nynaeve making their way back through the city of Abu Dar again, trying to get back to the palace, thinking and also kind of arguing with each other about the bowl and the women and what it is that the women know, particularly about like the age of Rianne, because something about Rianne's age, her gray hair, and the way that aging works with women who wield the power. So there's something that Elaine gets from this that Nynaeve isn't really understanding, and like there's an argument between them because of it. Whatever it is that Elaine's kind of determined based on Rianne's age, and her graying hair, despite whatever it is that she's noticed. Like I've said, I haven't put it together myself, but I'm sure it'll become important the next time these guys have a POV in the book. In the middle of like they're arguing with each other and being in the middle of the streets of Abu Dar, they are attacked by arrows that have blunted like stone ends. One of those knocks Elaine out. Another one dazes Nynaeve in the middle of it. Nynaeve uses the power basically to avoid what seems like is an attempted kidnapping of the two of them. Whoever's behind that, again, absolutely no idea, but Nynaeve is very frustrated and angry, so she's able to tap into the power and able to force all of the rest of them to like leave and skitter off, avoiding a kidnapping or whatever it is that they were planning to do, and also heals Elaine back up. And that was basically what happened in the chapter, but again, wasn't entirely following what a lot of that back half of the chapter was, between like the argument that they were having and stuff like that. I'm sure I'll figure out what half of that stuff means eventually. But this takes us into chapter 25, which was a Moghedien POV. I was not expecting a Moghedien POV, but it was pretty interesting. It seems like after being freed by Arengar/Halima in the epilogue of Lord of Chaos, and also in whatever the chapter it was in this book in which that scene is kind of recounted sort of secondhand via Egwene's POV, Moghedien was taken to the Dark One, and she's reliving this sort of dream, this sort of memory. She's forced to relive and being caught in, I guess, what the book or what Robert Jordan's calling a mind trap. She relives the dream and the memory of being freed by Halima/Arengar, skimming to Shayol Ghul because of being summoned by the Dark One directly, and also being made subservient to him there. Moghedien's memory dream sees her being critiqued by the Dark One, some of her actions, the fact that she's been teaching Elaine and Nynaeve stuff, even though she insists that she's not taught them very much, or that she's tried to get out of teaching them some things, like something to do with what they were trying to do with Rand. She taught them a way to do something that would make them basically sick or unable to use the power for an amount of time. So it's like she's trying to be proud of herself for that. But even so, the Dark One is not particularly enthused for obvious reasons. We see her mind trap being made within this sort of memory. Something to do with an item called a Kaursalvra, something. No idea how to pronounce this item. Don't even know properly what it is. But within this sort of like item, it seems like maybe it's like a bowl dish type of thing. Her saliva and her blood are mixed. Something that the Myrddraal, Shaidar, whatever his last name is, I forgot off the top of my head. But the Myrddraal, the Fade that is directly like a servant of the Dark One, who's bigger than all of the other Myrddraals. I forget his name. It's Shaidar something, even though it was said like several times in the chapter. I should have written it down. I thought I did. Oh, I did. Shaidar Haran. That's his name. This Myrddraal does something with Moghedien's saliva in her blood and whatever this item is to create the mind trap, to get her stuck in this sort of loop of a dream. Once she's finally freed from the dream, the Myrddraal Shaidar Haran escorts her to a man named Moradin, who, if I'm not mistaken, is one of the revived Forsaken, right? One of the Forsaken that at the beginning of Lord of Chaos, was that when it happened? The prologue of Lord of Chaos, when the Dark One revived a few of the Forsaken. One of them was Arengar. There was another like one or two of them in there as well, if I'm not mistaken. And was Moradin one of those? I think Moradin might be, because like this is the only name we're given for him, and Moradin just means death in whatever language. It might just be the old tongue. So I have the suspicion that this was just one of the revived Forsaken that I've forgotten about. If so, Moghedien was transferred to him. He's the one who holds her mind trap, so she kind of has to like deal with him, listen to what he says, or do as he commands, or whatever it is you want to consider it, because if he breaks her mind trap, it'll do something not great to her. No idea what it would do, but it probably wouldn't be great for her nonetheless. And he also explains to her that she now serves the Dark One in a different way. It's not really explained what this means, but it just means that her role as a Forsaken prior in the series, and even previous to the series it's not the same as how she's meant to serve the Dark One now. So I guess we'll see what that means later. Like I said, I think Moradin is one of the revived Forsaken, but one of the interesting things about him is one of the other notes that I get that makes me think that he's one of the revived Forsaken is because he is noted by Moghedien as being like super young, unrealistically young, to be able to tap into the true source, which is made distinct from the one source, apparently, or the one power and the true power, rather, which I didn't realize there was necessarily a distinction between these two. Apparently, the one power is just kind of the way that everybody can use the power, whereas the true power comes straight from the Dark One, and using the one power, or the true power, I shouldn't be getting these mixed up because that'll just confuse everything, and tapping into the true power directly from the Dark One too much, too often, whatever it is, will produce like a sort of appearance in a character's eyes that will make it obvious that they've used it a little bit too much. And apparently, normally, once you get to that point, you don't really actually have control over it when you try to tap into it, but it seems like this Moradin does have control in it, despite this appearance being in his eyes. So that's an interesting note. So that's all the stuff that happens chapter 25. A lot of interesting developments regarding Moghedien. No idea how this is going to continue further in the series, but I enjoyed the chapter, definitely, for what it was. But that takes us into chapter 26, which is yet another change in POV to Morghese, once again, for the first time since the prologue. And I gotta tell you, it doesn't feel like it's been that long since the prologue that we have another POV from Morghese, and that's a lie, actually. Morghese's POV wasn't even in the prologue. She just happened to be on a couple pages of Pedro Niles' POV. So, important distinction that I should make. But even so, this chapter was entirely her POV and was also a longer chapter, so that was exciting for me. I like being able to follow Morghese a little bit more often. In this chapter, it appears we get kind of hints and revelations that Morghese isn't being treated very well by the White Cloaks following Niles' assassination, following Niles' death. Of course, what's his name, Valda, is not treating her very well in particular. And she is awoken at some point in the night at the beginning, or rather, she just never fell asleep, I guess is probably the more accurate way to put it. Just, they happen to still be in the Fortress of the Light, the Fortress of the Children of the Light, however it's called. They're in Amador, is that the city? Yeah, Amador, down here, and in the middle of the night, an attack is launched upon the fortress, upon Amador, by the Shanshan. Morghese notices the one power being used over the course of the battle, but everybody kind of seems to be confused by this because Morghese being able to feel it, even though she can't really use the one power very much to any significant or notable degree, because she was trained at the White Tower, so she can kind of like feel when it's being used, so she detects that people are using it, but Aes Sedai wouldn't be able to just launch an attack on the city, and especially not without provocation. So people are kind of confused. She's like, okay, are these aren't Aes Sedai, aren't they? And then it was like 2 pages before it was directly revealed, oh yeah, this is the Shanshan. I was like, wait a minute, this reeks of Shanshan behavior all the way back from like the Great Hunt. So that was nice for me to get something right predicted ahead of time for once in the series, which doesn't happen very much. Either way, the attack is launched. That means that the one power being used over the course of this siege, I guess you could call it. It's not really a siege. This attack on the city is being wielded by Domani. So the sort of power-using slaves of the Shanshan. Morghese is taken to High Lady Suroth, who I think is somebody who we met, might have even had a POV from in The Great Hunt. Forget for sure off the top of my head. But we get to meet this character through Morghese's POV here. Apparently, the desire is for Morghese to aid the Shanshan in regaining Andor, because, of course, Suroth, the Shanshan are basically descendants of Lord Arthur Hawkwing and his dynasty in the first place anyway, and the reason the Shanshan are over on this part of the continent, or over on this continent, is to reclaim all of the land that was once Arthur Hawkwing's. And Lady Suroth obviously wants Morghese as the Queen of Andor to kind of help them gain Andor, to make that part of their reclaiming their land easier, a little bit more simple for them. That is a request that she makes there. Morghese essentially refuses, even though Suroth kind of threatens Morghese with the reaction of, oh, and if you kind of refuse to help us here, we'll turn you into kind of like a slave. Like this previous ruler from a different area of the world, she was taken to be a slave because she kind of refused to help us in this regard over in Terabon. So that's kind of terrifying, but Morghese goes back to her rooms anyway under consideration of how to deal with this situation. In her rooms, Morghese basically decides to revoke her place as the high seat of House Trakand and as the Queen of Andor, thus making Elaine's rise to power as the Queen of Andor much simpler for her later, so that more, there's not technicalities that Elaine will have to fight with. So Morghese is technically no longer queen in this moment because she's spoken these words. She speaks these words because she intends to just throw herself out the window so that she doesn't have to be either made into a slave by the Shan-Chan, nor does she have to help them take back Andor. So she makes this decision just like, okay, well, it would be bad for the queen to fling herself out the window, so I'm going to revoke my own queenship and then throw myself out the window. She is stopped from going out the window by a couple of the other women here that have kind of been part of the group. And at the very end of the chapter, she almost regrets having revoked, her queenship and stuff, because it turns out that they're going to make an escape basically provided by Master Gil, Talonvor, and the other man that are associated with this group. There's another one there that was named that I can't remember off the top of my head at all. They return at the very end of the chapter with Bauer, who was Niall's old spy master. Bauer did not see Morghese's station with Valda as a good thing, wanted to help her escape from that because clearly Bauer is not necessarily thought fondly of by Valda or the other White Cloaks, so he has no particular attachments to them. His attachment was to Niall, and since Niall's dead, he has no reason to be associated with these people anymore. So he decides to help Morghese and the others of them escape through technicalities of how the Shan-Chan are letting like merchants and people leave in accordance with spoken oaths and passes and stuff like that. Just kind of like, you guys can leave, if you speak the oath, you can take a certain number of people with you. So Bauer decides to take these other folk with them. So Morghese and Talonvor and all the rest. And now they're leaving the place entirely. So it'll be interesting to see where it is that they end up getting caught up with later, how this plot line moves on from here. I was not expecting these to be the developments of how this plot line went, but I'm interested to see more of it nonetheless. Chapter 27 takes us into another one short chapter POV of Perrin, who is recounting a little bit at the beginning of the chapter, him basically getting kicked out of Carrion entirely by Rand. That's an interesting development that I didn't see coming, following Rand's pronouncement of Barrelanes having to return to Mayene, and Loyal also being forced to leave Carrion for some reason or another. There's some interesting decisions that Rands are making here, and that these characters are pretty worried about. Loyal, for example, is worried that Rand's also going to force Min to leave for whatever reason, to kind of isolate himself for some reason. But all of these characters being kicked out, Rand and Perrin particularly have a disagreement that makes Rand tell Perrin, like, leave, I never want to see you again. So that's not great. So as a result, Perrin goes to where Zareen has a group of other people with her so that they can leave. Loyal invites Perrin and Zareen to go with him to visit some of the other steading, but he decides not to go with them. But Perrin makes way to the group that is going to all be leaving Carrion together here in this chapter. So Zareen and a corduroy of Aiel that she has with her. There seem to maybe be a couple Aes Sedai in the group. A couple Aes Sedai were mentioned in the chapter, but I don't know if they're technically part of the group, so I don't know what's going on there. A couple of the Ashaman are with the group, however, and plenty of Two Rivers folk, and then it seems like several hundred soldiers alongside Barrelane are also with the group. All of these people step through a gateway, travel a little bit through an Ashaman portal to another part of the world called Gaelden, which is kind of in that southwest quadrant, alongside places like Amadisia, where Amador is, and the likes, because the goal of Perrin and these other characters is to maybe not necessarily partner with the leader of Galen, but they have to kind of tell her that they're here and that they don't intend to invade. They're not here under hostile purposes. They are instead here to try to find and converse with Masama, who is the supposed prophet of the dragon, who is kind of causing some issues with Elaine and all of them in Fires of Heaven. Back in that portion of the world, sort of political upheaval, rioting caused by these supposed followers of the dragon. Perrin intends to try to recruit at least some of these people, be like, hey, if you want to follow the Dragon Reborn, you can follow him via us. That's probably a better way to do this rather than what you guys are doing politically here. And they also kind of want to talk with Masama to adjust the way that some of this stuff is going on in the world as well. So I'll be interested to see how that plot line continues as well, even though there's still some of those kind of notes of petty disagreement between Perrin and Zareen in here that's got me a little bit concerned about how following a plot line basically led by the two of them plus Berylane also being part of it is going to go. That's not something I'm hugely looking forward to, but even so, that makes up the end of the reading for this week. Thank goodness this recording is under an hour long, because I don't know how I'd continue with so much more like last week. I think this video is going to be a good bit shorter, but thank you guys for watching if you did. I'm still enjoying the book. There were a couple of those chapters there that I had a little bit of a harder time with, but that is okay. Next week, I will be covering another 9 chapters, if I'm not mistaken. Chapters 28 through 36 are what I plan to read this week. Get another 120 pages or so read out of A Crown of Swords, and then the last 90 pages I will read over the last couple days of the month, and cover that in the first Thursday of March. So I'm looking forward to continuing the book and coming up on the end. Just a couple hundred pages left, basically. Interested to see how Jordan plans to finish this book, because it doesn't actually seem like a whole lot has really happened in this one. Like I said, I'm kind of torn in this one in that I don't really feel like it's a slog book. I feel like the developments of things going on, the details of things that are happening, different plot lines are progressing in pretty much the same fashion that any other plot line has progressed in the series up to this point, even though I'm like 2/3 of the way through the book and not a whole lot has actively happened. It just feels like a lot of setup towards something a little bit bigger. I've heard that the beginning, like the first third or something of Path of Daggers, has what should technically actually be the climax of A Crown of Swords. So I'm interested to see what big major epic moment could happen from that. But I'm looking forward to reading more nonetheless. Thank you guys once again for watching. Like I said, I'll read those next 9 chapters and I'll be back again next week. For now, I've been your host, King Crusoe. You can call me KC, and I hope to see you guys there.